My neighbor set me up on what I thought was a joke date, and I almost walked out the second I realized what was happening. Mrs. Chen, the 76-year-old woman next door who'd been leaving dumplings at my door for months, had cornered me 3 days earlier with that look in her eyes, the one that said she was about to meddle in my life whether I liked it or not. "Zane," she'd said, gripping my arm with surprising strength for someone so frail, "I need you to meet someone, a woman. She needs furniture work, but she's difficult, older. Probably won't hire you, but do it as a favor to me." I should have known it was a setup. I should have seen through the thin excuse. But Mrs. Chen had this way of making you feel like you owed her something just for existing, so I agreed. What I didn't know was that this neighbor who set me up wasn't just playing matchmaker, she was dying, and this was her last gift to me. What I didn't know was that the woman walking through that coffee shop door would look at me like she could see straight through to the wound I'd been hiding for 3 years. What I didn't know was that my whole life was about to change in ways that would terrify me, heal me, and force me to choose between the safety of my grief and the risk of living again. The joke date wasn't supposed to matter. It was supposed to be an hour of awkward small talk, a polite excuse to leave, and then back to my cabin, my dog Harley, and the quiet life I'd built like a fortress around my broken heart. But when Elise walked in 20 minutes late, frazzled, with exhausted eyes and an apology that cut straight to the bone, everything I thought I knew about protecting myself started to crack. She sat down across from me, skipped the small talk entirely, and said something that made my chest tighten. "I just watched a patient die holding his wife's hand after 60 years of marriage, and now I'm here pretending I know how to do this. I'm sorry, I'm a hospice nurse, and I'm not good at hospice nurse. Pretending anymore." That's when I realized this wasn't a joke date at all. But what I didn't realize, what neither of us realized, was that the neighbor who set us up had been planning this moment for months, that she knew secrets about both of us that would collide in ways we never saw coming, and that the real setup wasn't the date itself. It was everything that came after. I stared at Elise across that small wooden table in Lakeview Coffee, the afternoon sunlight cutting through the window and catching the loose strands of brown hair that had escaped from her bun. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, but from the kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. She wore scrubs under a long cardigan, like she'd come straight from work and didn't have the energy to change. There was something about the way she sat, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't yet sipped, that made me forget I was supposed to be angry at Mrs. Chen for tricking me. "I'm sorry," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant. "About your patient." Elise looked up at me and her expression shifted, like she was surprised I'd said anything real. "Thank you," she whispered. "It never gets easier. Watching people say goodbye." I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have stuck to safe topics like the weather or the furniture Mrs. Chen supposedly needed. But something in Elise's honesty cracked open a door I'd been holding shut for 3 years. "My fiancé died," I said. The words fell out before I could stop them. 3 years ago, car accident, on our wedding day." Elise's hands tightened around her coffee cup and her eyes went wide, not with pity, but with recognition, like she knew exactly what it meant to carry that kind of weight. "Oh God," she breathed. "Zane, I'm so sorry." The way she said my name, like it mattered, like I mattered, made my throat close up. Nobody said my name like that anymore. Most people avoided talking about Sarah altogether, like pretending she never existed would make my grief less awkward for them. But Elise didn't look away. She leaned forward slightly, and I could smell the faint scent of lavender hand soap and hospital antiseptic. "I'm divorced," she said quietly. 15 years of marriage, and he left me for someone younger. Told me I was too serious, too sad, always around death. He made me feel like loving me was exhausting." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw her blink hard, fighting back tears she clearly didn't want me to see. "So here we are," she continued, forcing a small smile. "Two people who probably shouldn't be on a date, set up by a neighbor who apparently thinks we need saving." I let out a short laugh, surprising myself. Mrs. Chen's got a hell of a sense of humor. Elise's smile widened just a fraction. "She told me you were stubborn, quiet, and that you needed someone who wouldn't let you hide." My heart did a strange skip. "She said that?" "She said a lot of things," Elise admitted. "She made me promise I'd show up even though I told her I wasn't ready for this. She said you'd understand what it's like to feel broken." The air between us grew heavier, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. Outside the window, people walked by with their dogs and their shopping bags, living normal lives that felt impossibly far away. Inside this coffee shop, it was just me and Elise, and the truth we'd both been avoiding. "I don't know if I'm broken," I said slowly, "or if I'm just stuck." Elise nodded like she understood perfectly. "I think stuck and broken feel the same most days." We sat there for a moment, neither of us drinking our coffee, neither of us looking away. Then Elise did something I didn't expect. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from work, and the touch sent a jolt through me that I felt all the way to my chest. "Thank you for being honest," she said softly. "Most people lie on first dates." I looked down at her hand on mine and realized I hadn't let anyone touch me like this in 3 years, not in a way that meant something. "This doesn't feel like a first date," I admitted. "It feels like something else." Elise pulled her hand back slowly, like she didn't really want to, and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup again. "Mrs. Chen knew what she was doing," she said. "She told me you'd be good for me, that you'd see me, not just the tired nurse who smells like hospitals." I swallowed hard. "She told me you needed furniture work." Elise laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd heard from her. It was soft and genuine, and it made something in my chest loosen. "I don't need furniture work, Zane. I'm her hospice nurse. I've been taking care of her for 3 months. The world tilted. I stared at Elise, my brain scrambling to catch up. "Wait, you're Mrs. Chen's nurse?" Elise nodded, and her smile faded into something sad. "She has stage 4. Pancreatic cancer. 4 to 6 months, maybe less. She didn't want you to know yet. But she made me promise to meet you. She said if she was going to leave this world, she wanted to fix one thing first." My hands went cold. Mrs. Chen was dying. The woman who brought me dumplings and scolded me for working too late and reminded me so much of my grandmother was dying, and she'd spent her last months trying to set me up with her nurse. "She's dying," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. And this was her idea of help? Elise's eyes filled with tears. "She loves you, Zane. She talks about you all the time. She says you're wasting your life hiding in that cabin, and she can't stand the thought of leaving you alone." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. My chest felt tight, my hands shaking. "I need air." Elise stood too, grabbing her bag. "Zane, wait." But I was already walking toward the door, pushing it open, stepping out into the cool afternoon air that smelled like lake water and pine. My heart pounded in my ears, and I couldn't tell if I was angry or terrified or something else entirely. Elise followed me outside, her footsteps quick behind me. "Zane, please." I stopped on the sidewalk, hands shoved deep in my pockets, staring at the lake that stretched out calm and indifferent. "She's dying," I said again, like saying it out loud would make it real. "And she used her last months to play matchmaker." "She used her last months," Elise corrected gently, stepping beside me, "to give you a chance at living again." I turned to look at her, this woman I'd just met, this stranger who somehow felt like she understood me better than anyone had in years. Her eyes were still red-rimmed, her cardigan slightly askew, and she looked as lost as I felt. "What if I don't want to live again?" I asked, and my voice cracked. "What if staying stuck is easier?" Elise reached out and touched my arm, her hand warm even through my flannel shirt. "Then you stay stuck," she said quietly. "And I'll stay exhausted and sad and convinced I'm too much for anyone to love. And Mrs. Chen will die knowing she tried but couldn't save either of us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same fear in her eyes that I felt every single day. The fear of trying again, the fear of losing again, the fear that maybe we didn't deserve a second chance. But underneath that fear was something else, something small and fragile and stubborn. Hope. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. Elise squeezed my arm gently. "Neither do I." We stood there on the sidewalk as the sun started its slow descent toward the mountains, two broken people who'd been shoved together by a dying woman's last wish. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than numb. I felt terrified. And that felt like the beginning of something real. I didn't go home that night. Not right away. Elise and I walked along the lake trail until the sun dipped behind the mountains and the air turned sharp with cold. We didn't talk much at first, just walked side by side while our shoes crunched on the gravel path and the water lapped quietly against the shore. Harley would have loved this, I thought, and then immediately wondered why I was thinking about bringing my dog on walks with a woman I'd just met. But that's what Elise did to me. She made me think about futures I'd stopped imagining. When we finally sat down on a weathered bench overlooking the water, Elise pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and said something that made my chest ache. "I go see Mrs. Chen 3 times a week, sometimes more if she's having a bad day. And every single time she asks me if I've met you yet, if I've given you a chance." I looked at Elise's profile in the fading light, the way her breath came out in small clouds, the way she seemed so tired and so beautiful at the same time. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. "Why show up to this date knowing what it really was?" She turned to face me, and her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "Because she begged me to. Because she said you'd run if you knew she was sick, and she wanted us to meet as just 2 people first, not as her patient's nurse and her neighbor, just Zane and Elise." My throat tightened. That sounded exactly like something Mrs. Chen would do, manipulative and loving in equal measure. "She's right," I admitted. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have come." Elise nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I agreed to lie. But sitting across from you in that coffee shop, hearing about your fiancé, I couldn't keep pretending. You deserved to know the truth." I reached over and took her hand without thinking, lacing my fingers through hers. Her hand was cold from the evening air, and I rubbed my thumb across her knuckles trying to warm it. "What else did Mrs. Chen tell you about me?" I asked. Elise's lips curved into a sad smile. "She said you're the kindest man she's ever known, that you fixed her porch railing without being asked, that you shovel her walkway every time it snows, that you sit with her sometimes and don't make her feel like a burden. She said you have a good heart, but it's locked up so tight she's afraid you'll die with it still closed." I had to look away because the truth of those words cut too deep. "I don't know how to unlock it," I whispered. "I don't know how to stop being afraid." Elise squeezed my hand. "Maybe you don't have to stop being afraid. Maybe you just have to try anyway." We sat there until the stars started appearing, until the cold became too much to ignore, and when I finally walked Elise to her car, I didn't want to let go of her hand. "Can I see you again?" I asked, and my voice sounded raw. "Not because Mrs. Chen wants us to, but because I do." Elise looked up at me with those exhausted, beautiful eyes and nodded. "Yes. But Zane, you need to know something. Mrs. Chen's condition is going to get worse, and when it does, I'll be there with her until the end. If you and I do this, if we try this thing between us, you're going to watch me walk into grief over and over again. You're going to smell hospitals on my clothes and see death in my eyes some days. Can you handle that?" I thought about Sarah, about the accident, about 3 years of running from anything that reminded me of loss. And then I thought about the way Elise had looked at me in that coffee shop, like she saw all my broken pieces and didn't flinch. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I want to try." Elise reached up and touched my face, her palm warm against my cheek. "Then we'll try together." She kissed me softly, barely a brush of lips, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that would either save us both or destroy us. When she drove away, I stood in the parking lot watching her taillights disappear, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt alive. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Mrs. Chen's living room when everything changed. Elise had invited me over, said Mrs. Chen wanted to see me, and I'd brought a wooden jewelry box I'd carved with cherry blossoms because I knew they reminded her of her late husband. When I walked in, Mrs. Chen was in her recliner wrapped in blankets that seemed too big for her shrinking frame. Her face had that gray pallor I'd seen before on my grandmother right before the end, and my stomach dropped. But when she saw me, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Zane," she said, her voice weak but sharp, "you came, and you brought my nurse with you like I planned." Elise stood beside me, her hand finding mine automatically now, and I felt her fingers squeeze tight. "Mrs. Chen," I started, but she waved me off. "No crying yet, boy. I don't have time for sentiment. Sit." We sat on the couch across from her, and Mrs. Chen studied us with those knowing eyes that had seen through my walls from the very beginning. "You're holding hands," she observed, a smile tugging at her lips. "Good. That's very good." "You tricked us," I said, trying to sound angry but failing. "You lied to both of us." "I did," Mrs. Chen agreed without shame, "and I'd do it again. You were both dying in different ways, and I couldn't leave this world knowing I didn't try to save you." Elise wiped at her eyes with her free hand. "You should have told us." "If I'd told you, you'd have said no." Mrs. Chen replied simply. Love doesn't wait for permission, and neither do I. She leaned forward slightly, wincing with pain but determined. Zane, when my husband died, I wanted to die too. I stopped eating, stopped caring, stopped living. But then I moved here and I met you. And watching you do the same thing, watching you waste your beautiful life in that cabin with only a dog for company, it broke my heart. So I made a choice. I decided my last act in this world would be to give you a reason to live again. My throat closed completely. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. And Elise, Mrs. Chen continued, turning to her nurse, you've been taking care of dying people so long you forgot you're allowed to live too. You're allowed to be loved. You're allowed to want something for yourself. Elise was crying openly now, and so was I, tears running down my face without permission. Mrs. Chen reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out 2 envelopes, her hands shaking. These are for you. Letters. Don't open them until after I'm gone, but promise me something. Anything, I choked out. Promise me you'll take care of each other. Promise me this wasn't for nothing. Elise and I looked at each other, and in her tear-streaked face I saw my future, scary and uncertain and beautiful. We promise, Elise whispered. Mrs. Chen died 3 weeks later, with Elise holding one hand and me holding the other. And at her funeral, when Elise and I finally opened those letters, we found the same message written in shaky handwriting. Love is worth the risk. Always, even when it scares you, especially then. That was 2 years ago. Elise moved into my cabin 6 months after Mrs. Chen passed. Harley adores her. We got married last spring under the pine trees with cherry blossoms in her hair, and sometimes when I wake up next to her, I still can't believe a joke date set up by a dying neighbor gave me my whole life back. Mrs. Chen was right. Love doesn't wait for permission, and I'm so grateful she didn't either. So tell me, where are you watching this from? Have you ever had someone in your life who saw what you needed before you did? Drop a comment below and let me know your story. And if this moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because everyone deserves to hear stories that remind them love is always worth the risk.